Welcome to the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview modern-day explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, get out of their comfort zones, and accomplish ambitious pursuits. This is episode 144 with James Didier. I met James at the Outdoor Adventure Expo, put on by Midwest Mountaineering twice a year. He presented a really good story filled with a lot of great travel tips. But before we get to that, if you want to give me some feedback about the show, you can reach me at paul@thepursuitzone.com, and you can also leave me a voice message through SpeakPipe if you go to speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. James Didier began mountaineering in 2011 in Colorado. Since then, he has climbed several significant alpine peaks in North America and Europe. His most recent adventure was a summit of Europe's highest peak, Mount Elbrus in Russia, at 18,510 feet. James climbed without a guide and on a total budget of less than $1,500, including travel expenses, making Mount Elbrus possibly the most affordable of the 7 summits, and one of the easiest to get to. James Didier, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hey, Paul.
James, how did you get into mountaineering?
It was back in 2011 when I moved to Colorado. Being from the Midwest, didn't really have that opportunity. And just being surrounded by the beautiful Rocky Mountains and having some time to go climb. I worked for a sporting goods company, so it was kind of opportunistic where I could get pretty cheap gear and then just get out on the weekends and start climbing 14ers. And I just loved for me, it was about the cardio, but I came to like that the crisp air and the getting up high and a lot of solo stuff. I was kind of being out there by myself was really therapeutic.
Before Elbrus, what other mountaineering adventures have you been on?
So I'm about halfway through the 14ers in Colorado. I usually try to get back there in the summertime to hit up some more of those. In the States here, I've done Rainier. So I did a trip up the DC route 2 summers ago. And I've done Zugspitze in Germany, which is a via Ferrata route. It's Germany's highest peak, as well as Mont Blanc. I didn't summit, but I was within about 500 meters of the summit on Mont Blanc about 2 summers ago.
And how did Elbrus get on your radar?
It was actually a couple mountaineers that I met up with on Mont Blanc in Chamonix, Chamonix, France. And we were discussing kind of future trips, and one of the ones that the woman that I was speaking to, that she had talked about was Mount Elbrus. So it really wasn't on my radar up until that point. And after hearing her describe Russia and her experiences there, it sounded like a great trip to get out there, and not just for the mountain climbing, but just for the cultural experience.
What's Chamonix like?
Chamonix is fantastic. I've been to Chamonix twice now. I really enjoy trail running. Mountaineering is definitely a passion of mine, but as far as trail running goes, I don't think I've ever seen such a great playground for trail runners. Last summer I went out there. My intentions were to climb Mont Blanc again since I never did summit. But being back in that area, I realized how much stuff I hadn't tried yet. And my plans of climbing Mont Blanc kind of fell through because not so much fell through, but went to the wayside because I wanted to try all this other stuff. Like the Tour de Mont Blanc is this large circuit that runs around Mont Blanc. It traverses through France, Italy, and Switzerland. And I was able to do a portion of that. There's hang gliding going on. It's a great spot if you're into mountain climbing or rock climbing. And there's via Ferrata routes, if that's something that's of interest to you. And just the trail running, I'd say was probably the best I've ever seen.
They have that big trail race around Mont Blanc too. Have you ever thought of doing that?
Last summer I did the marathon. I didn't do the full not Tour de Mont Blanc, but the Mont Blanc circuit, which is I think it's about 120 miles, I want to say. I have thought about doing that, but I haven't really gone into the world of ultra marathons yet. That's kind of like, it's the elite ultra marathon, so you'd kind of work your way up to that at some point.
Via Ferrata, what does that mean?
I believe it means with a cable or using cables. Essentially, how I knew it on Zugspitze as Kletterstieg, which it's the same thing. It's just German for using cables. On the mountainside, on technical sections, they have cables that are actually drilled into the rock. You don't see this in America very often, but in Europe, it's fairly popular. And so on the traverse, you use a Via Ferrata set, which goes into your harness. Essentially, it's a dynamic system of two carabiners where you clip into the cable. And since you have two carabiners at any one point, you should never be removed from the cable. So you take one off to go beyond a pin, and then you take the next one off and slide it on. And it's just a method for ascending a route that's technical, but doesn't necessarily require technical rock climbing.
How much time did you need to plan this adventure to Elbrus?
I'd say the thing that took the longest was the visa process. If somebody was thinking about going to Russia, regardless of whether they're climbing Mount Elbrus or not, they're going to need a visa. And the process should probably be started at least 3 months ahead of time. I think I started mine about 5 months ahead of time, where I started looking into my methods of getting to Russia. Now, anybody planning on going to Russia is going to need an invitation. And that's going to come from, if you're doing a guided service, you could get an invitation. If you're not doing a guided service, you're going to have to pay some sort of visa invitation company. Essentially what they're doing is they're vouching for you that you are coming to Russia and you're staying in certain spots. Essentially, the Russian government wants to know where you're at all times. And so I started that process ahead of time. I was able to find a company that would take care of my visa invitation as well as some of the paperwork involved in it. And after that, the actual logistics of climbing Mount Elbrus wasn't too complicated. If you're using a hut, you'd want to contact some sort of hut service ahead of time. And I can get into that a little bit more too, but essentially that would be above base camp. There's huts on the way to Pastrikov Rocks, and that's where you'd stay before your summit attempt.
What's the best time of year to go?
Generally summertime. June might be a little early, July, August, and I've heard of people going in September as well. Pretty typical for your Alpine mountaineering.
So you mentioned earlier that you enjoy the solo stuff. Did you do this solo because of choice, or were you trying to get other people to go and just weren't able to find any?
No, it's not that I don't like people or anything like that. I really, I do enjoy doing certain sports as a group, but for mountaineering, I think having the control over your pace and the amount of risk you're going to take, I enjoy that. And I think that there can be great benefits of climbing a peak by yourself in terms of the accomplishments that can be had. When I started climbing out in Colorado, I didn't have too many people that I knew that climb mountains, but I quickly learned that sense of accomplishment that could be had by climbing a mountain by yourself was pretty great, as well as, like I had mentioned, choosing your pace. You get to decide your own itinerary, and there can be great consequence if you fail, but that kind of goes into the planning and the preparedness ahead of time.
When you get out there on the mountain, how many other people do you see out there? How many other people are attempting it?
On Mount Elbrus?
Yes.
That mountain gets a lot of attention and a lot of visitors in the summertime, but part of that is the recreation that happens on the mountain, not necessarily mountaineers. When you come into the Turksol, the Cheget region that this mountain is in, there are cable cars and lift chairs, just like any normal ski resort would have. And people are going up and skiing even in July, early July when I was there. Once you get to about base camp, then you'll start to see fewer people. But I would say on summit day, I did have a great weather day, the day I chose the summit. I saw at least 80 people pushing for the summit. So it's a very popular route.
So describe for me, you're leaving from Minneapolis Airport. How do you get from there to the starting point?
The most common approach would be coming through Moscow or St. Petersburg. I flew in. I actually was coming from France, and I flew into Moscow first. And then from Moscow, you fly into a small town called Mineral. And my pronunciation there might be wrong, but it's a town with an airport, obviously, that's on the southwest corner of Russia as it approaches Georgia. And that is the closest large airport to Terskol, which is the town closest to Elbrus. So you'd fly into Mineral from either Moscow or St. Petersburg. And then there's a 3 to 4 hour drive that's required to get to Terskol from the airport. And there's no shortage of people willing to give you rides. I had scheduled that ahead of time. We ran into some delays getting into Mineral, and my driver, he sat there for me and waited for a couple hours as the flight came in late, picked me up, and then we took this drive through the mountains in the middle of the night to get to Terskol, but it ended up being a 3.5 hour drive. So it's not the easiest approach, but there's definitely, once you get into Terskol, there's lots of support there.
Was there an online resource or something that you used to organize that pickup?
Yes. So I explored my options ahead of time about guiding services. I wanted to be at least familiar with some of my options there. In the end, I chose not to go guided, but I did find a guiding company that offered what they called a light package. And essentially what that light package included was visa invitation, as I spoke about earlier, local support in terms of an English translator, as well as if you run into issues when you get into the area, they're able to help out. And then that included the travel to and from the airport. So I was able to get the ride from the airport to Terskol and then a ride back when I was done climbing. You can add things onto this, such as meals and lodging. For instance, the night that I came in, I stayed in their hotel in Terskol, and then the next morning they served breakfast. So you can really tack on as many things as you want, up into and including having a guide take you all the way up the mountain. They have that support as well, like a one-on-one guide interaction.
Do you want to give the name of the company?
Sure. I should say that I'm not sponsored by this company or any other company, so I'm not getting any money for saying this, and I paid full price for their services. Pilgrim Tours was the company that I went with, and maybe you can add a link to their website on your podcast, but it's basically www.pilgrim-tours.com. And they have, as I spoke about, they have guided tours, but they also have the light package that I chose to use.
So how did you find the experience working with them?
Very positive. That's why I feel good about mentioning their name, because in the end, they were very supportive. When I first got into Terskol and they found out that I was planning on climbing solo, they were pretty hesitant to the idea. 2 weeks before I got out there, a man from Colorado, a sheriff actually, had kind of the same idea I had to go out there and solo Mount Elbrus. And he had chosen the light package with Pilgrim Tours as well, which again doesn't include a guide, so that part's up to you. He had gone up the mountain and the weather turned really, really fast. Within 10 minutes, it went from a bluebird day to whiteout conditions. And what they think may have happened is that he tried to come down or got off track and may have ended up in a crevasse, may have taken a large fall, but they never did end up finding his body. And so I could tell that weighed on them very heavily. They had gone up and tried to find him and were unsuccessful. So they were pretty cautious when I came in about me going up there solo. But we had some conversations about the safety measures that I took. And in the end, they were okay with the idea and everything went well.
Yeah, after I saw your presentation, I thought, and including some of the other things that we'll talk about in a bit with the Snowcats and whatnot, I really thought to myself, this is something I, as someone who's never done any mountaineering ever, could possibly do.
Right.
And so, I think it's important that you don't get overconfident or bad things can happen.
Yeah, it's a mountain that everybody has access to this mountain, especially with the approach. I can talk a little bit more about that as well. But it's a very approachable mountain. And so although just about anybody could probably climb this if they're in good shape and they're familiar with some of the equipment, you still need to have safety systems in play in case something were to go wrong.
So what equipment do you need to bring with you?
For Mount Elbrus, I brought my normal mountaineering gear. So you need equipment for the weather. Obviously, you need hydration and food. I also brought a spot locator. That was one of the things that made the Pilgrim Tour company feel a little bit more comfortable about me going up there, which is basically it's a device that if I were to run into trouble, for instance, let's say there were whiteout conditions, I'd be able to press the SOS button on there so that it would send out a signal for search and rescue to know that first I was in trouble and my specific location based on GPS. I'd say that is definitely a good thing to have on you. And it doesn't need to be Spot. Garmin makes one, and there are a couple other brands on the market that you could explore. As far as any sort of technical gear, I wore a harness, but I always do that on mountains, even when I climb solo. I think that's just, it's smart to have that as a backup. And I also wore crampons and used an ice axe because you are walking on a glacier, and there are some spots where a fall could potentially be fatal if you didn't self-arrest with your ice axe.
This is a question I didn't write down, James, but it just came to my mind. If somebody wants to learn how to, or if someone wants to get into mountaineering and learn all this stuff, how do they do that? Is it just a matter of going out with more experienced people and learning from them, or are there classes that you can take, potentially in your local area? What do you recommend?
Yeah, good question, because I do know some people in the Midwest here that would love to get into it, but there's a lot of barriers in place. To really learn what it's like to climb a mountain, you need to climb a mountain, and without having that access, that can be really difficult. In my own experience, my preparation was to first become physically fit, or make sure that I had the ability to do the physical work. And then as I tried more difficult mountains, to get the technical bits out of the way. And someone that's looking to climb a mountain that requires some technical skills may want to do a guided trip. And there are plenty of guided services that are in the Rockies and the Cascades. If you wanted to try a mountain like Mount Baker or Rainier, there's some good guided services in Colorado as well. They're going to teach you some important skills that you can use on other mountains if you were to go by yourself. So that would be one route to do it, as well as, just use the internet. YouTube is your friend, and there's textbooks that can teach you these things, but there's nothing like learning from somebody else on site, being in the field. So yeah, if you have a friend that's into mountaineering, or if you know some people, go out with them and have them teach you a couple things.
So let's talk about the route up the mountain, and tell me about the different milestones, I guess, that you hit, and what was your plan for acclimatizing?
Before I traveled to Russia, I'd kind of mapped out the climb, and you can read all you want on Mountain Project or your various mountaineering sites that have beta on the mountains, but it really doesn't give you the best idea of what you're in for. Everybody kind of has their own opinions on how the climb goes. And I kind of based my timeline on some guided services that I was looking up. Generally, they give their clients around 10 days to climb this mountain. And I thought, I'm in pretty good shape. I know I can, if they're doing it in 10 days, I think I can do it well within 10 days. But I gave myself 10 days in case something were to go wrong. I didn't have a weather window. Or if I had extra days, I could always travel to Moscow or St. Petersburg and spend some extra days there. So with 10 days in mind, the day I got into Turskol, or that night, I had looked up the weather, and I had actually seen that there was a weather window 3 days out from the day I came in, which was pretty quick as far as a summit day goes. So my approach may have been a little fast for what is the general consensus on this mountain. Generally, people will go up to what's called base camp on Mount Elbrus, is anywhere from barrel camp up to this hut called Project 11. And this is, in terms of meters, and I don't have the feet for you right now, but in terms of meters, it's anywhere from 3,900 to 4,100 meters. And that's generally what's considered base camp on the mountain. After spending a day there, generally people start taking acclimation hikes up the mountain. It is a fairly tall mountain. We're talking 18,600 feet or 5,600 meters. And usually those acclimation hikes go up to what's called Pashchukov rocks. It's this set of rocks that are around 4,800 meters in altitude. And they'll do that for a number of days before taking a rest day and then getting up early on summit day with a good weather window, getting up early around 1 a.m. and making their approach to the summit. And that summit day can be a long day. That can be a day where it takes you all morning and a good part of the early afternoon to summit, and then the rest of the day to descend back down to base camp. So that's kind of the approach that I took. And I did, because of my expedited process of climbing it in 3 days, I did get a lot of altitude sickness, actually. I had left an area near the barrel camp at around 2 a.m. And by the time I got to the saddle, which is a region between the west and east summit of Mount Elbrus, I was experiencing some really bad altitude sickness. And that was because I had chosen to climb the mountain in 3 days as opposed to extending it out a couple more days. That'd probably be a better, if I was going to suggest anybody climb this mountain in a certain number of days, I would say give yourself probably 5.
What kind of symptoms? Just headaches?
The symptoms I had were headaches, and I was also feeling pretty nauseous around the time I got to the saddle, to the point that I actually stayed on the saddle for a little while just to reassess how I was doing. I kind of set up a little camp there for about a half an hour, and after waiting for about a half an hour, I made the decision that I was probably in good enough shape to summit, but the headache was pretty bad. It could have been, and I don't want to get this wrong now because it is a medical term that I should be remembering, but cerebral edema, I believe I have that right. That's essentially a condition that could be potentially fatal, and it involves the swelling of the brain. And it definitely did feel like my head was kind of in a vice as I made the approach to the summit. But that's a condition that if you get lower on the mountain quickly, get back down to a lower elevation, it's essentially it heals itself. It's when people stay at high altitude with those symptoms that you tend to see really bad things happen.
Which summit did you go up?
Oh yeah, good point. I should mention that the highest point on Mount Elbrus is the west summit. The east summit is people do summit the east summit. I saw the day that I went up, out of the 80 people that were going up the mountain, about 5 of them went towards the east summit.
And you chose the west?
I did choose the west.
Tell me a bit about the Snowcats and the snowmobiles.
That's an industry that's definitely alive and thriving in the Elbrus region. Essentially what it is a service that allows you to take a Snowcat, which is a large vehicle with, I'm not sure how I would describe it.
Yeah, it's got tracks like a tank, and
it does, yes, tracks, and it's got a cabin inside, so you can actually even be inside of it without even being outdoors, essentially. Depending on how many people there are, they have a little lift on the backside, that a little trailer that you can jump into. And then there's snowmobiles, and the service basically provides transportation from around the barrel camp region, the base camp, all the way up to Pashchukov rocks. So it shaves off about 900 meters of the climb. And a surprising number of people chose that option when I was on Mount Elbrus, including a guy that I had met from China who had wanted to summit with me. And he had made the decision, since he had gone through all the work of getting there and he didn't want to come back to do it again. he had made the decision that he was going to take a Snowcat. And so that was kind of the wedge that drove us apart there, is that I didn't want to go that route. And so I ended up doing it solo. For a little bit, I had thought about climbing with him because he seemed like a very knowledgeable mountaineer. They do charge money for the Snowcat. I don't have those numbers for you right off the bat, but I want to say it's around $200 for a Snowcat ride up. And then I think they charge another fee of maybe $40 to $80 to get back down. It's less going back down. And my personal opinion on it is that it doesn't belong on the mountain. I think it's kind of an eyesore, first off, and it really takes away from the experience of being up on a high mountain. That morning that I had gotten up, I had gotten up maybe about an hour late, 2 a.m., and I looked up the mountain, and all I saw were lights going towards Pashkov Rocks, the lights of the snowmobiles and the Snowcats. And they definitely don't care about giving you your space when you're going up. They'll drive right on by you. It's kind of a dangerous situation. I'm surprised nobody has been killed yet by a Snowcat or snowmobile coming back down out of control. Especially later in the day, Mike, when I was descending the mountain, a lot of Snowcats and snowmobiles were coming down, and you get kind of that wet slab kind of effect where you're getting really soft snow on the surface that's sliding. And these people that were coming down on these Snowcats and especially the snowmobiles, they had no ability to stop. If they were to approach somebody and they tried to stop, the sled would basically just slide right into the person because it's wet and slippery. So I don't think it's something that belongs in the mountain. I think that if we wanted it to, it would be an industry that's gone in a second. We just need to get rid of the demand for it, and people are using it.
What's barrel camp like?
So I didn't actually stay in barrel camp. That's kind of just the marker that a lot of people use as base camp. The camp I stayed at was Pilgrim Huts had a hut system that was maybe about 100 meters higher on the mountain. And it was kind of a boxcar system. So if you've ever stayed in a boxcar before, it was kind of like that. And there was one hut that was kind of a communal hut. They had a cook in there, but that's for guided services. So if you chose to do a Pilgrim Tours guided trip, that would be where you were eating your meals. The other huts were sleeper cars. Yeah, I'm not sure what more to say about that. It was just kind of a unique experience staying in a hut on a mountain.
Did you find any problems with the language barrier?
I had thought that I had run into more problems. I don't speak any Russian. Small phrases, small things, just your general hi, goodbye, thank you, and yes, no. But apart from that, I was able to do the trip without running into too many issues. I think maybe the biggest, the spots that I ran into the most amount of trouble was when I had gone to Moscow afterwards, and a couple times getting lost turned out to be quite a hassle, not speaking any Russian. But I managed, and sometimes you just gotta, when you don't speak the language, you just gotta make it work and kind of use a lot of your induction of what things probably mean based on context clues.
So if you're going to go all the way to Russia to do this, and you're already over there, what else do you recommend people to do? I mean, what else did you do while you were over there?
Yeah, so I'd had that weather window 3 days in, and after summiting, I came all the way back down to Terskol that day. And having given myself 10 days to climb it, I had a lot of extra days to go try something. And in fact, I was able to book a flight that night, the same day that I had summited, to St. Petersburg from the Mineral airport. I think it may have cost me $100 for the one way, which was actually expensive for what I probably should have paid but hadn't planned ahead. St. Petersburg is fantastic. I would say if anybody had to pick one city, my personal opinion would be it should be St. Petersburg to explore. Everything's just historic there. Almost all the famous people from Russia have grown up or lived in St. Petersburg at one point in their life. And then Moscow was the other city that I explored, and I think there's a lot to be said about having that Moscow experience. going to see the Kremlin and Red Square. I saw Lenin's body, so I went through the mausoleum. I went to a couple exhibits they had on aerospace and science and engineering. Lots of interesting things to explore in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And I'm really glad I had those extra days to do that, because I may never be back in Russia. If I did go back, I think I'd spend more time in St. Petersburg because it's such a beautiful city.
What kind of hotel prices were you looking at?
Yeah, so let me do some ruble. Ruble is the currency that's used in Russia. So the conversion is something like 1 ruble is $0.017. So $1 would be about, we'll say, 60 rubles. And Russia was very affordable, in my opinion, especially when you're outside of the bigger cities. So when I was in the Tursko region, I could stay at a hotel and go have dinner for a fraction of the cost of being in the U.S. anywhere. When I was in St. Petersburg, I could go out to dinner, and the cuisine was amazing. I'd have an entree with a side and a drink, and sometimes it would cost me in U.S. dollars, sometimes less than $10 for the meal. So very affordable. And I always stayed in hostels, so my experience of hotels is pretty limited. The one hotel I did stay in was $20 for one night, but that was in the Mineral Vody area. I imagine in St. Petersburg or Moscow, you're going to pay closer to $50 for a hotel.
What turned out to be the most memorable part of the trip for you?
Apart from climbing Mount Elbrus, which was an amazing experience, I had some fun memories in St. Petersburg and Moscow that I'll never forget. Meeting locals, I think, was always the most memorable points of my trip. One night, it was the first night in St. Petersburg, actually. So the first night in St. Petersburg, I decided that I was going to go out and kind of explore the city a little bit. And I ended up at a bar, and I was trying to order a drink, and 2 young guys sitting next to me were realized that I was speaking English, and they asked me where I was from. And I'd said the United States. And they got really excited by that. They were out celebrating one of the guys that just graduated from his master's program. And so they wanted to take me out. And so we went out all around St. Petersburg. They're showing me all their favorite stops. Come to find out, these guys were curlers. It was really funny, actually, because they asked me where in the United States I was from, and I said Minnesota. And they said, "Oh, Bemidji." And if anybody knows anything about Minnesota, Bemidji should not be the city that comes to mind. But they had known about that city because that's where our U.S. curling team is located. And so they started talking about curling and about how they beat us in the Olympics. The U.S. men's curling team beat the Russian men's curling team had beat the U.S. men's team in the Olympics, and they're really proud of that fact. One of the guys was really proud of the fact. He kept mentioning how they beat us. I think they still took maybe 7th, so they didn't medal, but one of the guys had said to me, "All right, tomorrow I'm going to give you a tour of St. Petersburg." And I figured, he's just saying this. There's no way I'm going to hear from him tomorrow. Next morning I get up, and on Instagram I already have a message from him saying, "Are you ready for your tour?" And that day we met up. He gave me a full tour of St. Petersburg, which was amazing, getting a tour from a local. And I found out that his friend, the one that we had gone out to celebrate his master's program graduation that night, was actually, when he had said that he had beat the U.S. in curling, he was actually the skip of the Olympic men's team. He was the guy that beat the U.S., and I hadn't put that together all night. I figured he was just talking in generalities, not in specifically beating them as the skip of their team. So that was really funny. The fact that I had hung out with the Olympic curling team in Russia that night without even knowing it.
I like that story. That's a good one. It makes me laugh when they say Bemidji.
Right.
What turned out to be the most challenging part of this trip for you?
Honestly, I think the hardest part of the trip was the logistics of just getting there and planning everything ahead of time. A lot of information that's out there isn't all that great, or it's all over the place, so you kind of have to put it all together yourself. Once I was in Russia, things seemed to come together pretty well. So that was one of the more difficult things, just the planning phase. If anybody runs into that, being frustrated by getting a trip together there, I'd say be resilient, be persistent, and in the end, you'll be really happy that you visited Russia, I think.
You are a high school chemistry teacher, is that true?
Yep.
Did you plan on working as a teacher so that you could have the summers off?
No, that actually didn't go into it at all. It was something I liked teaching back in college. I was a teaching assistant in some chemistry labs, and I was a tutor all throughout college. And it was one of those things that I just enjoyed most about my college experience. And so because I like teaching so much, that kind of was what got me involved in it. And it is nice having the summers off, although I'm essentially unemployed during the summer. So, it doesn't always make sense for me to be running around all summer spending money when I should probably be making money.
What's the toughest thing about teaching high school?
Well, I don't know about you, Paul, but when I was in high school, I was a pretty crazy kid. And now I have to be in charge of these guys. And I have a lot of empathy for them because I think it's tough to be, sitting down all day, learning about things that you're not sure if you're going to be using for the rest of your life. So probably the toughest thing is convincing my students that even though they might not be using chemistry later in life, that the process of learning it is beneficial. Just the process of learning something new, something unique, is beneficial to your overall well-being. I think getting that message across is challenging, but definitely worth it.
Yeah, I suppose sometimes that age, they're know-it-alls. There was no cell phones when I was in high school. I mean, no small cell phones like there are today. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem? Does your school allow phones in the classroom?
Our school is very supportive of whatever the teachers decide. So they'll support me if I took a strong stance against cell phones. That's not the approach that I've taken so far. My approach has basically been, I don't want to make it a battle because it's just kind of a never-ending battle that I probably won't win in the end if I were to make it a thing. So I try to use it to support the learning. That's not to say that it's not a distractor in the classroom, because it is tough to compete with what they have in their pocket. It's a source of entertainment that it's very hard to compete with as a teacher. So that is it's an interesting point you bring up, because that is another challenge, is that constant entertainment value and that instant gratification that comes with being on your device. It's very hard as a teacher to match that or to compete with that.
James, what's next for you?
I'm actually leaving in about 4 or 5 days here. I'm taking off to flying to Mexico City with a friend of mine, and we're going to head over to Pico de Arizaba, which is another 18,000 foot mountain, and we're going to go climb that. It's a volcano in Mexico. It's the third tallest in North America, behind Denali and Mount Logan. And depending on how things go there, we might hit up one more volcano before heading on back to the Midwest.
Do you have any way for people to contact you if they want to learn more about your adventures?
They could always shoot me an email. That'd probably be the best method.
What's your email address?
It's wild.hockey@yahoo.com. That's wild.hockey@yahoo.com.
Okay. James Didier, thank you so much for coming on the show, and congratulations on your summit of Elbrus, and good luck in Mexico.
Thanks, Paul.
Recorded December 22nd, 2017. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.